Ken Phelan here, CTO for Gotham Technology Group. Thank you for joining us for our, I guess this is a session in a series of sessions on technology that we talk to different experts about different interesting areas. And today we're talking about resiliency and why that's a hot topic, what's going on in that area. And I've got actually a few people with me today instead of just one. I'll let them introduce themselves. But I got two people from Rubrik, Drew and Chris, who are going to help. They've got backgrounds in this area, and I've got Brian Wagner from Gotham. So why don't you guys introduce yourselves? Drew, I guess we'll start with you because you're my on the left of my screen. Why don't you go there?
Yeah, hey everybody, great to virtually meet you here. Like Ken mentioned, I am at Rubrik, been here for almost 5 years at this point. I am part of what we call Rubrik X here internally. In essence, it is kind of like an incubator, a startup within a startup here, very much focused around our next generation product lines and figuring out what the industry is doing and how does Rubrik respond to that. So very much focused around the data security conversation, obviously, and then I am also very specifically focused around all things Microsoft for us.
Perfect, thanks, Drew. Chris, can you give us a little background on you?
Yeah, good morning, guys. Chris Culver, I'm an account executive here at Rubrik. Been at Rubrik for a little over 3 years and spent most of those 3 years actually as a sales engineer. And prior to this, I worked on the partner community focused on data protection as a managed service. Spent 12 years on the customer side, heavily focused on data protection and all things messaging, Exchange, M365, virtualization, all that kind of stuff. So happy to talk to you guys.
Excellent, thanks. And Brian Wagner.
Hey everybody, Brian Wagner. I'm the Director of End User Computing and Cloud at Gotham. I've been with Gotham for, I'll just say, over 20 years and have a lot of background in Microsoft land as well as, just general infrastructure.
Awesome, thanks, man. Yeah, Brian's our principal. Actually, you're not principal architect anymore. We changed your title. We promoted you to them. I can't remember the new title, but I know you're like the key of everything.
What's
the new title?
Director. Yeah.
Practice director. Nice. There you go. Yes, Brian's with us over 20 years. We got him when he was 7, so don't tell the child to leave. Yeah. Excellent. Thanks, everybody. So, I think on some level, it's interesting to say that this is interesting in the sense that we've heard a lot of customers have been asking questions about this. Like when I pick the topics here, I don't really have any genius about it. I just talk about the things everyone's talking to me about. And everyone's talking to me about resiliency and the problems and this and that. But it's kind of a weird thing because backup and restore has got to be one of the oldest things we've got going in IT, right? It's like a 50-year-old story, right, going back to the mainframes in the 70s. What about this is changing, or why is this such a hot topic right now? And I guess I'll start with Chris because he's like leaning forward, so I feel like you're ready to go. Chris, where are you? That's cool. Like back, right? Are you like?
So I'm actually at I'm traveling. I'm at a QBR event today up in Burlington, Mass. So I actually live in Connecticut. It was like a almost 2-hour ride with traffic out here this morning, but it's a really nice hotel called the Archer. Nice. And for those of you who are into like early 90s comedies, it immediately made me think of like Dumb and Dumber when they show up to that really nice hotel. So it's for our most distinguished guests, right? And then Jim Carrey decides to jump on the bed. But yeah, so it's a great question. Data protection in my mind has always been something that like was always historically just this expensive insurance policy. Nobody ever really thought it was like, all that great, right? It was just one of those things you had to check the box for compliance and for somebody in the business to say, yeah, can you recover files if somebody needs to, recover a deleted file? That's drastically changed in this modern world that we're in due to things like ransomware. Ransomware is a heavy focus for us. And, it's one of those things where cybersecurity plays such a critical role in data protection these days, because at the end of the day, it's massively important that you continue to do all the things you do around perimeter defense, network defense, application controls, and endpoint. But data is kind of like the new oil, right? Without your data, your business can't thrive, it can't function. And so we're wholly focused on being that zero trust layer in your data, data point, and ensuring that you can always recover from ransomware 100% of the time.
I mean, I guess I'll ask Drew this question. I mean, what makes it different? I mean, and I think to me, it's like if you started today, you look at an old technology like backup, it's been around forever. You're like, okay, I'm going to make a brand new backup system, even though there's these things have been around forever. Like what, to me, what's the criteria for like this new breed? Like what are the to-do items when you're starting a new backup, a new, data resiliency company?
Yeah, so first of all, I loved your backup is not sexy point. I know when I first started, I would get on customer calls and say, I don't care about backup. Like I was focused on, APIs and automation for it. So that definitely rings true.
Yeah.
But like Chris said, it's been flipped on its head. So great start to the combo here. To answer your question around kind of like this next generation product and what makes that, the way I have always kind of viewed this is, my first job in IT was as an intern on a help desk. I didn't know what was going on. Like my job was to pass out monitors to people. And every day I would see this person in a kind of uniform come up and pick up this box next to the door. I had no idea what they were doing. See this on a daily basis, just kind of part of the routine. And then one day as any good intern does, I actually deleted a bunch of data from one of our NAS shares. I'm like, okay, what I need to go get this back. And like, oh, we got backup. It's no big deal. Go up to our main backup admin. And it's like, hey, this is what happened. How do I get it back? And his response was, oh, that's stored downtown on a tape library that we'd have to ship back to our headquarters, put into our tape system and restore it. Turns out that's what the person was picking up every day. This was, probably 15 years ago at this point. So not too far in the past, but that just blew my mind. Like I couldn't believe like this is what the process was to restore data back. And to me, this next generation product line is basically saying that's not acceptable. That should never be a possibility. We always should have this click restore functionality that always ensures your data can get back and do it quickly without any kind of oversight or kind of manual process, right? It's how do I take this converged infrastructure that we saw, with things like Nutanix and bringing everything together in a single stack and applying that concept of data security or data protection at the time, and really just providing this easy button, for lack of a better term, take away the nerd knobs, take away any kind of thought with this, and just have a product that works. So that's how I always viewed Rubrik and obviously some of the competitors in the space that came along at the same time as us.
Yeah, to me, I don't know, Brian, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was going to say, I kind of helped, like manage our backup infrastructure before we were on Rubrik, which was, I guess, almost 6 years ago now when we, that we've been on the Rubrik platform. But it required a lot of management, and I think that was, really the first piece that was exciting, to get off of what we were doing for a really long time was to not have people involved, and I think that was the biggest thing. And I think some of the really nice things that I like as, someone who actually had to set it up and administrate it is just moving away from actually getting, being in the console. Like you spend some time up front, you develop some policies, and structures that you want for how you want to do backup, what your retention is, how much you want on-prem, how much you want in the cloud, and kind of moving that from Iron Mountain tapes that we were sending out, to using the cloud for a long-term archival, and really having, I think it was even less cost at the end of that, doing that archive in the cloud than it was to have Iron Mountain, have people taking out tapes out of the tape drives, bringing, putting them somewhere where they can come and pick it up, going back and forth from our data center, which was a co-location facility. If you take, even without the people aspect, it was still cheaper. And then when you factor in the amount of actual physical time people were spending working on it and dealing with it, it was another thing. And then the other side of it is actually, if you ever needed to use those backups, if you needed to do a restore, the amount of time it would take to restore and search on the tape for the data you're looking for, and actually do it where you're like click, click, click. Oh, the VM is up. It's really amazing. So I think those are the things, when we first implemented it, that really stood out. And then I think the other piece of it is over time, it's just, like the same platform has given us so much more functionality. We've been able to now take those archive backups and actually instantiate them as virtual machines in AWS or Azure, things like that at the time it was just data. And then that data all of a sudden became something that we can use for not only for backup, but actually for DR, and I think that was another thing that really changed the game as far as, the legacy stuff that we had been doing for a long time. And that everyone does. And guess what? People are still doing the tapes and dealing with that. We're on calls all the time. And it blows my mind that even today, people are still having that pain.
Yeah, it's nutty. We have to, we should add ourselves. We are a Rubrik reseller and a Rubrik customer, which is, that's one of my strongest recommendations, because as a reseller, we get a bunch of stuff for free. Like if I actually pay for something, it must be good. So I actually paid for the Rubrik. So
Yes.
and we still like it. So it's a pretty good thing. But to me, it's also about like this, like what are the check boxes? Like, I need rapid restore. I need immutability. I need they're just a bunch of things like in order to be, like to your point, has to be cloud. Like they're just these check boxes that if you're going to do this today, you just have to have these things. And I think that's important to understand, because I think a lot of people are sort of rushing into this space. It's a very hot space. And maybe have some or all those check boxes or don't do them right. And I think a lot of traditional vendors are like, oh, it's all about backing up to hard drives. I can back up to hard drives. Like they kind of make this whole thing happen. So, I mean, I guess, let me just give you a second to talk about check boxes aside, how is Rubrik different from just people who sort of are this next gen that have backup to cloud or have rapid restore? And I guess I'll go to Drew first this time, because Chris has been getting all the first questions.
I will, so as a tech person and kind of somebody who gets into our code base and gets into the weeds of the product, it's hard for me to answer this without a technical viewpoint or maybe a focus on that, but I'm going to flip it on its head. And I think the most important differentiator for Rubrik is how we view this space. We view this as not a backup and recovery company. We view this as a true security company. Like, this is important because it obviously kind of focuses our product line and how do we address today's market. What are the issues we see? Like Chris was saying, this isn't a traditional unsexy backup and recovery situation. It's how do we really look at this from an actual security perspective. Not only do we want to back up your data, have it fully resilient to these attacks, right? You talked about immutability. For us, that's table stakes, things that everybody should do at this point. What we want to do is give you this +1, +2, +3 on top of it that allows you to take advantage of your data and have it be a true value prop for you above and beyond like running your business off it. So how do I detect these attacks as they happen? How do I find these threats that are part of your ecosystem? How do I just allow you to recover and really have this be your last line of defense from a security standpoint? It's a little bit of a broader answer, but to me, that's why it's so exciting to be at Rubrik these days. I won't name the competitor, but one of their leaderships, recently said that they don't view their company as a security space. And that absolutely blew my mind. Like, to me, this is a fundamental aspect that anybody in this world, for lack of a better term, needs to focus on. And it's what we're seeing from our customers on a day in, day out basis. I've been on so many calls where we're talking to their traditional backup team and they stop us halfway through and say, wait a minute, we're not talking about backup. We're talking about security here. I need to bring these folks into the conversation. And this is where Rubrik is focusing our attention and really where we're kind of at today. There's so many things that we're working on, behind the covers that we haven't announced yet that are just kind of just mind-blowing for the lack of a better term. But, I think that's the important part that separates Rubrik from everybody else in the space today. And you see that with a lot of the recent announcements we do. Our new CISO came from the CIA. He was the CISO at the CIA. Like, I can't think of better credentials in this space. We're starting a new CIO advisory board with like the industry leaders in this space. And this is, I think, a great way to kind of conceptualize how Rubrik views this kind of problem in today's world.
So Brian, you've been out to competitive situations. How do you think Rubrik compares and differentiates?
Yeah, I think that story resonates that Drew was mentioning. I think from all the conversations we have, as we talk about, ransomware is really on everyone's forefront, right? And being able to not only recover quickly, but recover it all. I mean, at the end of the day, we see so many other solutions that it's literally, it didn't take a long time for them to realize that if they are able to get to your backups, then they're probably going to get paid. I think at the end of the day, that was something. So even I've been in a lot of ransomware recovery efforts, with customers, and fortunately, a lot of times we're able to be creative or get back. But there are definitely situations that we've seen, and we still continue to see that the backup is gone. And if they're able to attack those backups, then guess what? You really don't have a choice, right? You start to lose any hand you might have had previously. So, I think from that perspective, it is a security conversation. We need to have a solution that can basically, get ahead of it, right? And kind of be able to monitor what's going on and actually tell you when there might be something happening, right? And that's some of the capabilities that we see in the product that they've built in over time. So really all the, since we've been on the platform, that story has changed, right? It always had the immutable storage. We've been in that space already, and we've, but I don't even think they realized how important it was 6 years ago, and I think over time, the story, as the attacks have changed and things have happened, the story's changed, right? And the product was already kind of aligned that way. But I think, the value, or really the focus, and the people you're talking to has changed, because it's really, as Drew was mentioning, we're getting really more into the cybersecurity side of the house in these conversations than your typical infrastructure conversations where we started, when Rubrik was just kind of hitting the ground 6-7 years ago, or whatever it was. So, so from that, it's really changed the conversation. It actually brought some of those teams together, as well, right? It's a collaborative effort now between those two groups.
Yeah, I always say that good engineering because good engineering meets the requirements. Great engineering because there's a new requirement and it meets the new requirement. The great engineering it's got an aesthetic that basically bends that. Chris, what do you want to add on this about how you guys are differentiating?
Yeah, so I think there was all good points brought up. And one of the things I like to do, right, when I'm talking to folks is I would challenge you, anybody that's listening in, anybody that's going to watch this after the fact, rather than me tell you something, I would challenge you to ask yourself a couple of questions. One of those being, hey, if you had a ransomware event today, what would that remediation plan look like? Right? How confident are you in your data protection? And if you have a sense of confidence that you think your data protection platform is safe and couldn't be compromised, I would then ask you to proceed down the next piece in the path of putting yourself in a ransomware situation. And that's, how do I identify what sensitive data might have been compromised, right? Sensitive data is becoming a major ploy in these attacks now, where the bad guys are living in your environment. I think Forrester and Gartner says something like 3 to 6 months now, or I think the last thing I read was like 180 days plus, right? So if these bad guys are in your environment for that long, you don't know they're there. They're taking several terabytes, or in large scale environments, potentially more, out of your environment. And they then issue the ransom note. Even if they can't get to your backup environment, they say, hey, you know what? We're gonna issue the ransom. You can choose to pay it, or you can choose not. But the reality is, if you don't pay it, we've exfiltrated 20, 50 terabytes of data out of your network. We're just going to leak it out there on the dark web. You better hope there's no sensitive information in there, or intellectual property or anything, because the brand damage, the regulatory fines, the lawsuits, all of those potential resume generating events that compile in are going to far outweigh the ransom. And let's face it, even if you decide to pay the ransom, you're dealing with criminals here that, I think the last statistic I read from like the state of the ransomware last year was like 54% or something like that of people that pay the ransom either don't get their data back or only get a portion of it back. So again, how do you understand, was there sensitive information exposed with the tools you have today? How do you know what machines were impacted? I was dealing with a local customer, actually happens to be a Gotham customer who bought Rubrik. Thankfully they had Rubrik. They were hit by ransomware a little while back. These guys were in their environment for some period of time, were monitoring email, knew that their engineers both happened to be out that managed backup at the same time. They issued a ransomware payload on their production storage. They compromised a VMware admin account, powered off all their VMs, encrypted 100% of their storage, couldn't get into their Rubrik device. But essentially, if they had backup running in that virtual environment still, a lot of competitors keep their backup platform running in the hypervisor layer. It's not air gapped. That data is gone. It doesn't matter, even if you're writing to some type of secondary storage that's immutable. You can't bring up the VMs that run that environment, or you're using a SQL database as a front end to host that catalog or platform. It doesn't matter if you have that second immutable storage. That's why it's table stakes. It's the whole picture, right? The immutability, it's the air gap, it's multi-factor authentication or time-based one-time password or every 30 seconds I get a passphrase on this device. It's retention lock. It's tying all those things together and then using AI and machine learning to show you exactly what files and folders were impacted in an event, because it's all guesswork otherwise, and what sensitive data might have been exposed, then give you point in time to recover in an automated fashion in minutes to hours versus, I think they say it's 21 to 31 days now on average. So kind of a long-winded answer, but again, these are the questions you got to ask yourself. What's your ransomware response plan look like?
Yeah, and a lot of it's just I think that response, that time is important, because I think that like that's one of the issues. I think when we go into a lot of customers, but they're that old Iron Mountain guy in the uniform, that was air gapped, that he was walking away with it. But at the same time, when we see customers get hit, and it just takes their expectation of how long this is going to take and how long it's really going to take in ransomware. And I know, like you were saying, Brian, like you're involved with a lot of these ransomware situations from a Gotham perspective. You come in and kind of help the team reassemble. I mean, what I guess I know you kind of said this, but I mean, what's it like when there isn't this, when you're working with traditionals? I mean, how do you even get it together?
Yeah, I mean, generally sometimes it's impossible. Sometimes you get lucky, that something they didn't shut down that actually wasn't encrypted, that was, ended up being, where most of the good things are. We've gotten, but it's luck. I mean, at the end of the day, if they're in there, depending on how good they are, and as they were mentioning, how long they've been in and how much, kind of planning went in on their side. What I think you have to realize is, I know there's hospital systems in New Jersey that paid, let's say, $25 million ransom. I mean, if you think about how much infrastructure these ransomware attackers have, like the amount, their companies. I actually was involved in one of the negotiations with them, and we were going back and forth with them that kind of leading them on that we were going to pay, because we were trying to see how much we can recover in the meantime, right? So we were kind of leading them on, and eventually the guy came back and said, "Hey, like I set these I set these expectations with my boss, and like I'm going to get in trouble if I don't get the $1 million you guys promised me." Now I'm supposed to feel bad for the ransomware guy, who's
they have HR departments as part
right,
of
they're like full, they're
they
like
really
enterprises.
It's crazy.
Now. If you think about if you were saying, how many of those companies actually paid, it's hundreds of millions of dollars, and when you look at that, that's some serious cash. And guess what? They're putting it back into their business, right? They're hiring new people, they're getting better, better systems. So, I think from that perspective, it's really hard, but so having a solution that kind of at least gets you ahead of it, right? And either ahead of the recovery, ahead of the information that you need to kind of drive the decisions you need to make, right? What did they get? What did they have access to? It gives you direction, and it kind of gives you the upper hand, right? And I think that's the important thing, because generally you're playing catch up.
Right. It's kind of hard to understand. Drew, I'm going to ask you this question. It's kind of hard for me to understand, like as a just my owner hat, my board hat, like someone's painting this scenario, like you've lost everything. If you're ransomware, you've lost your AD, you've lost your privileged users. They've broken into your traditional backups and destroyed everything, whatever. But this one thing is going to be safe. It's immutable and safe. Like, explain to me how that one thing's safe when everything else has turned to shit. How does that work? That the whole rest of my world is bricked, and you guys are somehow safe?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the best way I look at this is like this holistic defense in depth conversation, right? You have to assume compromise, and you have to have all these layers in place. So our fundamental viewpoint is we're assuming all of those layers are breached at this point, right? I think that's very unique in the security space. All these other products are designed for prevention and trying to make sure it doesn't happen. They're not assuming like this is worst case scenario, the sky's on fire. That's kind of fundamentally how Rubrik plays into it. We have to assume this worst case scenario and architect our solution in place. And there's so many different controls in place. And I know zero trust is a buzzword these days, but it's a great way of thinking about how we do this, right? It's how locked down are these backups? How do we do things like our retention lock SLA that basically says you can't modify this in any way, shape, or form. You could have God mode to the Rubrik system, but unless you call under Rubrik support and have Rubrik support, physically contact, we'll call Brian as an example, like you can't make these modifications. And it's this holistic strategy that is not only a defense in depth from your holistic security perspective, but also just as importantly from the Rubrik perspective that allows us to respond in these situations. So it's just check after check after check that frankly is an unfortunately tested on a daily basis. You know, we have a ransomware response team here at Rubrik. At any given time, they're dealing with 5 different customers who have been attacked in some form or fashion. You know, this is a tried and true approach that we're so confident in that we have a $5 million warranty that says if Rubrik can't restore your environment, we'll pay you, $5 million. And I think it's always the proof is in the pudding. You know, we have a track record here that, says this works. This is a solid solution.
Yeah. Chris, do you have any magic way of explaining why it is that you're the one thing that's not breached?
Yeah, I'd like to add one thing to what Drew just said too. I'd like to say kind of a little bit of a snark remark, but I'm going to throw it out there anyhow. I'd like to say, in this space, it's no surprise, right? Competitors follow one another, right? Somebody releases a top of the line feature. Usually it's within a quarter or a half or something that, a competitor has a similar feature. It's interesting to me that nobody else has offered up a ransomware recovery warranty yet, that we're the only company in the industry that's doing this. So again, it just goes back to like some of these companies were built in a time that ransomware wasn't a thing. They've had an ironclad grip on the space for 20, 30 plus years. And those weren't threats that were around at that time. So we're just built differently. We're architected very differently. I kind of really just leave it at that, I guess.
Yeah, I like, again, it's that whole, you're saying zero trust, but just that whole concept. I mean, the truth of the matter is, like you said, like Ryan went up and logged into our Rubrik as him and his God mode thing, whatever. He couldn't change the backups, right? And that's starting from that position. And that's not the way people normally build this stuff. So I think that's part of it. When I asked Brian this question the first time when we bought the Rubrik, he said, "Just trust me, just buy it." I don't know if you ever add on to that, but it works. Yeah, but I love the warranty. What, Brian? You want anything? Anything to this?
You're right. I mean, at the time though, I think again, our focus was a little bit different, but over time, the fact that we've had all these structures in, and then the additional kind of security, features that they've added, like hey, 2 people got to turn the key at the same time, support and us to be able to delete a backup. Those are things that they've added, right? And I think those, seeing those innovations, and as they're mentioning, the warranty and other things are just kind of like, because they feel so, comfortable with their solution, right?
Yeah, and the warranty is pretty outstanding in a sense, just that A, that it exists, and B, to your point, I think if I go to my Google right now and type in, ransomware, like every single security company is going to tell you how they're the solution for ransomware, right? And we sell a lot of those products, and those products have a lot of value for a lot of different reasons. But obviously, the reason we're having this conversation is at the end of the day, resiliency is the solution. Like being able to recover is critical to the path. I mean, I'm going to ask, do you guys? First of all, I think you probably find that, Chris, like people look at this and go, I don't need this. I have whatever, SentinelOne, I have something that I already bought because my CISO told me it fixes ransomware. So there's sort of, now you're competing with that space. You're competing with every other product says they fix ransomware. And I also want to ask, and I think I know the answer to this. Like, you guys haven't had to pay the money out yet, right? That's a true statement, right? You have not had to pay the $5 million. Drew's nodding. Chris, like, yeah.
That's a true statement.
Yeah. So how does that put you in? So now you're competing with the rest of the ransomware space. Like, what how do you convince people that resiliency is the right solution instead of more protection layers?
So I always like to tell people, like, we're not a replacement for those protection layers. We'd be foolish to say, hey, we're so good that you don't need to try to protect your environment, right? Because the whole idea is to minimize and prevent that downtime that stops businesses from generating revenue, or healthcare systems from servicing people and saving people's lives, right? The reality is you need that perimeter defense, right? You need that firewall, you need that intrusion prevention system, the spam filter. You need to be doing everything you can to give people least privilege access at the application layer and have endpoint protection. Those are all necessary. What we're saying is, like, if, or more so when, the bad guys get through, because it will happen, right? You can do everything in your power. The reality is, if you look at a company like NVIDIA, right? We're all in the tech space. I think we all know who NVIDIA is. They had an event, I think it was sometime last year or something like that. You'd be foolish to believe that they're not investing millions of dollars in all those defense layers we just mentioned. So it's a matter of when the bad guys get through. And when that happens, how do you ensure that you always have a zero trust solution around your data that ensures nobody that's not supposed to gain access to it can alter it in any way, or even like a rogue employee. You know, again, going back to Brian's point of, hey, it takes two keys to turn the knob that allows engineering to push the code down that will unlock that SLA for you to modify a retention period. You know, that's the difference.
I think the other, I would say real quick, the other difference too is we're all human. No matter how many layers you have in place, your weak point is always going to be your employees. Like, that's just a hard fact. And no matter how many layers of protection in place, you know, somebody could accidentally click a link in a phishing email and boom, they're already in your network. You know, they've bypassed those layers kind of automatically and kind of by design. So that's the, you know, from talking to CISOs, that's the thing that keeps them up at night. You know, what are these insider threats, whether accidental or malicious?
Yeah.
Ken,
you're saying, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to add one more point, going back to your question. Yep. Actually, I think there's one thing that hasn't been talked about yet that's massively important. So I mentioned I spent 12 years on the customer side before, you know, coming over to a vendor and partner world, right? What I'll say is, having been in that space and then also having spoke with so many different people, what I've noticed is, for whatever the reason may be, and I don't know what it is, I think I know, but security operations and infrastructure operations are usually two separate teams if security is like a big initiative in an organization. For whatever the reason may be, those two teams almost never jive well or work well together, you know, and I think it's, in my opinion, I think what the reason being is because it's like security is an inconvenience, right? It'd be great if we could all leave our houses and cars unlocked and, you know, be able to, you know, do things easily without security being an inconvenience. And I think security is setting all these policies that hold infrastructure people back that just want to get their job done. And so what happens is, when you challenge people to ask themselves about ransomware, you know, a lot of times the conversation, the answer you get, oh, well, that's security's job. Okay, well, is it not true that if security implements these policies and you're managing all of the infrastructure components, if you have an event, they're going to come to you for recovery, right? Well, yeah, I guess that's true. Okay, so how is security or how is infrastructure going to be able to identify what was impacted or where that sensitive information was, right? And so I think having a tool set like Rubrik, where we can identify exactly every file or folder that was impacted, every sensitive file that might have been contained, because backup touches everything, right? It gives you the ability to now enable cross-department communication. You're now helping security do their job where they can help you in your recovery process. So I think that's a massive thing that hasn't been talked about yet, and how we help those two teams come together, and why, you know, we're kind of that cohesive bonding that doesn't exist elsewhere.
I mean, I love this kumbaya feel, but I do feel like we do start conflict, right? I mean, like we tell this story to a chief risk person or a CISO or someone like that, and you're right. Generally, backup still sits under IT administration on some level, and so they kind of send us down the hall to talk to the backup team. The backup team is like, you know, it's like the priesthood of, you know, the leftover, you know, mainframe guys, like these old guys who do it for 50 years. It's not a sexy thing. They've got their tattoos, whatever the tattoo is. They got an Avamar tattoo, some kind of tattoo, and they just kind of like send us like, oh, you young whippersnappers, you don't know, like, we've got other problems here. Like, you know, we do business continuity. We've been doing it for years. I mean, don't you feel that that's part of the natural process of kind of bringing this in, that you start this sort of, you know, and yes, it's great if it all works out, and it does work out in the end to some extent, but not always without a little bit of political pushing. I mean, Brian, wouldn't you say that's kind of like a semi-standard way that this operates?
Yeah, you know, and you know what, like, I felt that way too before I kind of, like, you know, really saw the light, if you will. But, you know, I think that's not uncommon for people to, you know, really be comfortable with the solution. They had a lot of time and effort and decisions went into picking what they were doing, right? You know, so I think, you know, from their perspective, they, you know, I think the difference is the requirements have changed, right? You know, and I think that's part of it, and trying to kind of talk to them about, hey, the stuff you've been doing, maybe handled the requirements you had, you know, 10 years ago, but the requirements are different now. And that kind of security side of it is something that, unfortunately, these people need to start thinking about, or they're going to need to address somehow, and they don't have a good solution. But even if it's not, you know, I've also had the same situation where it's not only like, you know, when we think of Rubrik, we're thinking more, you know, kind of backing up, you know, the actual servers themselves and the data on them. I had a similar conversation with, you know, kind of a SQL and Oracle team at one of my customers, who said, we have the best solution ever. Like I'm not, the customer actually already had Rubrik, right? And when we went and they asked us to come in and say, hey, how can we do more with Rubrik? Like, what can we do to, basically get more out of this product? And when we went in, it looked like they were basically backing up all their SQL and Oracle to a disk and Rubrik was just backing up that disk. And I'm like, what are you guys doing here? Like there's so much more you could do with Rubrik to protect your databases. And then they said, oh, no, you can't talk to the SQL and Oracle. Like those people, they are so set in their way. They're never going to look at any other solution. Just forget it. And I said, why don't we just get them on the phone? Like do a demo and show them. So we ended up, begrudgingly, the whole team got on the phone. They did not want to be there. The minute they got on, they were talking through their convoluted process of backups and restores and stuff that they do. So we said, that's great. We went through it with them. We kind of showed them what's possible and the ability to, let's say, restore a 2 terabyte database immediately. And the guy's like, what? What did you just do? And within like minutes, they were already talking about how they're, what are we going to back up first here? How do we prove this out for our other, so it is interesting. I think at some level people are set in their ways, but they also don't know what's out there. They haven't, and if you can break through that assumption layer and get into reality, of like, hey, this is what it can do and this is how it's going to help you, and like, what are your pain points? Oh, it takes, you got to restore this off of here. You're restoring it here, then you're restoring it there. And how long does that take? Oh, it takes at least 4 hours, and you're like, oh, I can have it in 2 minutes, or 30 seconds, and it changes. It solves problems that they do have, but they weren't actually talking about, right? Like they just kind of told the business there's no other way to do it. And this is the best we can do, and so, it's tough to remove those tattoos, but at the same time, we've had a lot of success. And I think part of it is just really trying to dig into the weeds of they still have problems. They're not talking about them, but they still have problems. And what we've seen is Rubrik really does have an answer to those problems, whatever it is, whether it's a security type of thing or really just, maybe just a challenge on SLAs for RPO and RTO or whatever, so things like that.
Yeah. True. Drew, I'm sure you have a story of the same. There must be some time when you went into some boardroom and all the guys were sitting there with their arms folded. And I call them baboon meetings because they basically walk into a baboon cage and they're all like throwing monkey feces at you, like they're beating their chest and they're telling you that, well, what are you going to do about legal holds? And what are you going to do about this? And what are you, do you have an agent for DB2? So like, what's your experience with sort of that conversation as well?
Yeah, you definitely have to very politely tell them that none of that matters. And it's tough, right? No matter what. I mean, at the same time, like these people are set in their ways for a reason, right? There's definitely even concern around like losing their job. Like it's very common for us to go into sell Rubrik and these admins, okay, like, am I losing my job? Like if you can automate all this, what purpose do I do? So you really kind of just have to find out what their business use cases are and align how Rubrik applies to those. And like Brian was saying, like this is how we do it better. This is how we protect you. I think at the same time, the conversations are really changing where that's becoming a lot easier. These folks realize that they're screwed if these ransomware attacks happen, right? It's their names on the line. These are the people who have to deal with it, and they've maybe have preached it forever to their management team. They haven't listened, but now this is, a lot of times, if they have a board, it's a board level mandate. Like this is getting pushed from the top down. So we've definitely had it. We've had those conversations. We still do it probably on a regular basis, but I would say it's really changing. With the kind of visibility into it, everybody knows these ransomware attacks. It's almost impossible to keep up with them these days, right? There's so many happening. It's just so prevalent. It's absolutely crazy. So it's how do we make sure that we tell the Rubrik story? This is where we're focused. This is who we have working on our product, and it's I'm sure everybody says it, but this is really a true partnership, right? We have an entire ransomware response team that every customer gets at no charge. That they deal with this on a daily basis. They're here to help you. We don't want to sell you this product and say good luck. It's how do we take your feedback? How do we put that into the product? How do we do that quickly? And then really just have this holistic partnership with them and turn them into, and Chris probably has even more experience with this than I do, that changing into the person that says I'll never do it to having them be your champion internally. Like, well, shit, we need this. So
Chris, anything you want to chime in on this, or are we ready for the next? I'm ready to go from the past to the future because I want to talk about cloud a little bit, because I think one of the board perceptions of cloud, if I go to Amazon, if I go to Azure, or go to M365, that the cloud is naturally resilient, and I don't need to have I would not have this problem if I went cloud. So what would you say to that concept, that like if I go cloud, obviously Amazon, Azure, they're infinite. Like I don't need to worry about resiliency in the cloud. What's our story there?
Good luck if you think that.
Yeah. I'll throw one thing out there and then let Drew chime in, because Drew's kind of an expert in that space and on the Rubrik team. What I'll say is I'll focus on Microsoft, for instance, just because so many people, because of COVID, have been driven to Microsoft 365. If you literally Google, any one of you has a computer open, feel free to Google Microsoft shared responsibility model. It's going to take you to a docs.microsoft.com page, right? Microsoft published this article. It shows you a chart of all the different things, right? SaaS, PaaS, infrastructure as a service, you name it. And the very first thing that it calls out as the customer 100% responsibility, not Microsoft responsibility, not shared responsibility, is SaaS data protection. Microsoft tells you, and if you read their EULA, which nobody really reads the fine print in those things, right? We all just agree next. It literally calls out and says, we recommend you use third-party backup, because Microsoft is a industry best, and so is AWS, right? They're industry best at, providing you high availability and doing all the great things around compliance and everything like that. But they're basically saying, hey, this is your job to actually protect your data, not our job, because we're basically giving you that minimum checkbox for compliance and audit. And if you have a backup policy and you view email and SharePoint and OneDrive and all those things as a tier 1 app, it's really on you to protect that. And I'll let Drew elaborate on why, because I don't want to steal his thunder. He's a rock star there.
The way I always kind of describe it is a very simple formula. Like Chris said, these tools, and I'm sure as you guys have seen, these tools are more popular than ever. A lot of it was pandemic related. Everybody is at the edge now, right? They're not in the office. So it's these collaboration tools like the 365 that are at the heart of organizations. So by default, these tools are more popular than ever. And at the same time, more and more business critical data lives in these platforms. So it's the quote mandate on this, it's a gold mine. At the same time, Ken, you nailed on the head that this has always been a viewpoint that these cloud tools, these SaaS tools have this native kind of protection because you don't have to worry about it, right? The networking stack is taken care of, the firewall stack and all that kind of things are just automatically solved. That's a prevalent viewpoint in the industry, and what that translates to is almost all the customers we talk to don't have this protection in place. So the formula is all this gold mine of data and limited protection in place beyond kind of some of the native functionality. And from a common sense perspective, if we go back to what Brian was saying, if you have an entire organization dedicated to attacking companies, what are you going to target? The platforms that these companies, like Rubrik or call it IBM or whoever, like these traditional companies have invested so much money to protect it, or are you going after the tools that have the valuable data with no last line of defense? Common sense, this is what you're going to target. And at the same time, like especially if you look at the Microsoft 365 world, if I ask the customers what they're using for protection, they're going to tell me retention policies, they're going to tell me recycle bin and version control. The caveat here is that everybody knows that, and this is what's being used to attack it. Not exaggerating, when I jumped on the call here, I got emailed a new report from Proofpoint that basically was talking about how they're seeing these attacks happen in the wild. It's the version controls that are being used to attack it, right? It's a very simple process to say, hey, if you can store 100 versions of a document, let me just put together a script as a ransomware attacker that says, I'm going to override that 100 times and then encrypt it. At that point, what can you do? All your copies are gone. Or if you have a retention policy, if I'm attacking you, I'm taking a retention policy from 30 days down to a day and blowing things away automatically. So it's these tools that have always been assuming and protecting them are actually now being used to attack you. Like it's absolutely crazy. And by far, it's the most popular product line at Rubrik today. This is almost nobody has a protection in place. There is an immediate need. Going back with what Chris was saying, not only will Microsoft tell you this, The US government will tell you this. There's cease alerts about it. Microsoft Security has posted, going, not to bring up, geopolitics here, but, if you look at what's happening in Ukraine, at the exact same time that happened, there is an increase in Russian attacks on 365 specifically. Everything is pointing towards this being a major attack vector. And it's every day I'm getting new articles about this, new studies. It is a major vulnerability out in the world. So it's something that needs to be kind of taken seriously here, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, Brian, do you have some experience with this same problem?
Yeah, for sure. I think just as everyone's mentioned, there's just an assumption that something's happening up there, but nothing's happening up there. So if you have M365, there is zero backup. The only thing that Microsoft can try to provide you is SLAs around availability, right? But availability of your mailbox that's been attacked is not really going to help you, right? So looking back at these solutions, one of the nicest parts about what I like about Rubrik's solution is that someone can sign up with me today and be configured today for backup, right? It's literally, you make a tenant to tenant, like a Rubrik to tenant relationship, right? And then you instantly have the ability to back up mailboxes, Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, literally that, that day, that immediate response is an awesome feature to do that. And on top of that, they're also providing the storage that you're, to actually host that backup data. So, it even makes it just so much easier, foolproof, but also just like an all-in cost. Like, people know exactly. Right. I think that's part of the other problem with cloud is that you start backing up yourself to the cloud. Everyone's like, oh man, I don't even know what it's going to cost. And what if it costs, like so much more? I'm going to get fired if I get some kind of big cloud bill because I just dumped all the storage up there. It's a concern that, with their solution, if you choose their storage, it's basically the storage price. You pick the tier you want, but it's included in what you're getting. And it's something that you don't need to manage directly. They're managing that storage. So, talk about, it's not like I can do something wrong in the Azure console and now my backup data is can be compromised, right? It's something that's taken off of my plate as an admin completely. I make the change. I start backing up all that stuff based on SLAs, and you can have all different type of scenarios where certain people might be backing up, a couple times a day, and other people, whatever, daily, right? You have different capabilities on how aggressive you want to be, but the real piece there is really just that I don't actually have to manage the target location of that backup data, and it's just something that takes a big piece of kind of the concern out of your organization.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of opened an interesting point, which is like, this is a cloud solution for a cloud problem. Like the concept that you're not going to buy a Rubrik device, put it in your old data center and start backing up the cloud to your, the boxes inside your machine because the cloud might be bad.
That's a good point. And a lot of the other, but guess what? A lot of the competing products actually take the data that you move to the cloud and bring it back on-prem for backup, and it's another one of those things. I'm like, why would you ever want to do that? I already got rid of it. I don't want it back. That was the whole point of moving it, but that's the only solution, or they just want to hold it and hug it every day. I don't know, but either way, I think that's a big piece here, in that, it is staying up there and it's a cloud to cloud connection. So it kind of takes all that off of your concern.
Yeah, Chris or Drew, would you want to add some more to that?
Yeah, I was gonna say, more importantly, it's not only is it a cloud-based solution, it's actually leveraging a cloud-native architecture. That is the biggest differentiator for us, in terms of if looking at like the SaaS-based world. You can't protect these tools with this on-prem mindset. If we go back to when we first created this product, obviously Rubrik is deployed across the globe in data centers with our customers. Like the logical choice and the easy button for us was, hey, let's just add this to our core product. Add a button in the UI that says we do it. But fundamentally, you need the ability to, in essence, increase the number of jobs you can do in parallel to kind of work around the constraints that Microsoft has in place natively. So without this ability to burst up our compute workloads, I'll say unlimited here for lack of better terms, but obviously there will be a limit. If we can give you 1,000 compute instances running instantaneously, like that's how you restore in these mass situations. You just fundamentally can't do that in a data center world. And if you can, it'll be very cost prohibitive. Like you're not going to spend all that, capital to have this sitting there most of the time in this, today's world, right? It's eating up so many resources. Without this mindset that if it's a SaaS solution, you have to have a SaaS architecture, you're doing yourself a disservice. So I'm very grateful for our engineering teams, that did this beforehand, before I even got involved. So.
Excellent. So Chris, you seem quiet over there, so I'll give you some questions. So we're starting to wrap, I'm going to at the end here. So like, what are the challenges in moving to a Rubrik solution or any of these kind of solutions? I mean, what in your mind looks like a best practice in terms of transitions? What should customers expect if they make this move in terms of process?
I mean, honestly, it sounds simpler than it is, but it's a pretty easy implementation in the sense that, one of the core value propositions when we built the product 8 years ago was to simplify things drastically. I know we've talked mostly about security on this call, and we've talked about some cloud things, but we were designed in an era that we wanted to simplify the way backup was going, right? We've talked about tape quite a bit. If you think about the components in a legacy infrastructure, you maybe have a database front end somewhere, a master server, media servers, proxies, storage, tape. You have all these different components that are physical, there's software, there's support on all of them and different things. Our whole mindset was like, okay, for cloud, we just want to do everything through SaaS with all APIs, right? Let's simplify the hell out of this thing and, make day-to-day administration super easy. I mean, I've done countless POCs as an SE and helped to do installs of Microsoft 365 and backup stuff in Azure, AWS. It literally takes less than an hour. I would say as little as a half hour to set up deployment and begin protecting Microsoft 365. We have a benchmark that we did a little while ago where we, basically figured out that we could back up 10,000 users in a week and we could recover 10,000 in a day. And so from a simplicity standpoint, it's massive. On-prem, same idea, right? We eliminate all of those components I mentioned in legacy infrastructure, and we consolidate it down to a 2U hyper-converged appliance that is the entire hardware and software stack. It takes 45 minutes to an hour to stand this thing up, and literally, like on deployments or POCs, we can begin protecting workloads, VMware, SQL, Oracle, physical. Step out for lunch, and when we come back, we have recovery test points for all of those workloads. So massively easy. A lot of times it can be, hey, you know what? We don't have the appetite to take on everything at once if they're a massive customer with thousands of servers. We'll pick a pain point in their environment. Maybe it's, hey, we need faster SQL restore times, and we start with a primary application that's generating their revenue and pick that as a point. Or maybe we start with Microsoft 365 because I think it's like 74% of organizations aren't protecting Microsoft 365 today. And then we just use that as a growth period. Smaller shops, you can just drop it and replace everything. There's no major professional services. It's easy.
Awesome. Thanks. Anything to add on that, Brian or Drew? Any thoughts about what a good implementation looks like?
I'll just add, again, we've done it, we did it in-house and we've done it at countless customers. And, really, I think it's a totally different approach to the other solutions. I think we spend, there's actually like the biggest piece of the implementation is actually just thinking about your design for your backups, like the SLAs, how often do you want, what different scenarios do you want? So some small examples is internally, you can kind of directly map to what you have in set up in VMware, which is what most of our customers are running, right? And if we're talking about on-prem, and you can map to, let's say, your folder structure that you have in there. And this has been something very, very simple to kind of, like conceptually wrap your head around. Like I have a development folder that has all of my development machines in it. I have a testing QA and I have a production, right? And for each of those, you might say, you know what, for test, maybe I'll just keep 30 days on-prem and I don't need to send it off to the cloud. Like if it went away, it's not there. And I want to do it every night. But for production, I want, every 4 hours, or I want, and I want to keep it, a mirror of everything I have on-prem for 30 days, but also have another year, 7 years, whatever in the cloud, right? And you kind of come up with these policies, which they call SLAs, and we spend a little time kind of discussing all these capabilities with the customer. Maybe this conversation is a handful of hours, and then you get into the console and you're like, click, 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 done. Make the integration to VMware. It imports the folder list. You apply those policies at the folders, and guess what? Now, when you add a new VM, if it's in the test folder, it's automatically, you build a new VM, it gets in that folder, it gets the right policies, and then you move it to production, because guess what? We're not testing anymore. Now it's production, and immediately it gets the right policy structure. I don't need to go in and, say, oh, I got a new VM, I want to back this up, and this is what I want it to do, right? You just kind of use the natural ways that people are actually leveraging the folder structures and things within VMware to kind of map to that. So I think there's just some fundamental things that they've done on just like approach to how you set the stuff up that just makes the implementation and then ongoing management, really, really, really easy.
The thing I quickly add to the conversation too is don't, for lack of a better term, don't sleep on what the art of the possible is here. One of our largest customers today initially had, I think it was like a 10-year mandate to switch over to a next generation data protection solution. But with the urgency in today's marketplace, they got that done in 6 months. Something, don't quote me on those timelines, but that's the general gist, right? 10 years to 6 months to deploy Rubrik fully in an ecosystem. And we're seeing this time and time again. If there's a will, there's a way. And with today's world, there's a lot of will to get this done. And like Chris was saying, the overall design of Rubrik is to do this easily and as simple as possible.
Yeah, I think one of the strengths of the architecture is that whole API level VM thing, that you're not putting agents on machines. You don't have to worry about performance impact on database servers, things like that. I mean, that just drives you. You can move very quickly when you're not worried about breaking stuff. And generally that's the case. You don't have to worry about breaking stuff. So, all right, we're just about wrapped up here. So are there any final thoughts? I think actually, if anybody has any questions, you can shout them out too. You can unmute yourself. But Chris, any closing thoughts? Anything we should have talked about?
No, I think we did a good job covering just about everything. I mean, fantastic, right? We touched on simplicity, we touched on security, very much in depth, as well as how we can help you guys with cloud and acceleration on that. So good stuff.
Yeah, and again, we're just getting in front of a parade here. Like I said, we're seeing so many questions, seeing so many sales, seeing this whole space blow up. So that's obvious motion. Brian, any closing thoughts here?
Nothing major. I think we hit it all.
We hit it all. Yeah.
Yeah.
The only closing thought we have is that Chris said that we should be really doing this in the afternoon with whiskey instead of in the morning with coffee, which is a comment we've gotten a few times. But
yes,
like I can see Drew's like getting distracted by his email over there. He's like, have to go to the lady day. Anything else, Drew, before you head off and onto the rest of your problems today?
I just agree with that whiskey viewpoint. I'm always ready for that. So just a lot of fun here. Great conversation. Appreciate everybody joining the call. And like we've talked about, this is top of mind across the board. So, reach out to us, let us know if there's anything we can do to help. Both our teams are on standby to, like I said, build a partnership here and make sure that everybody, takes this kind of new viewpoint around data security.
Awesome. Great, guys. Well, great conversation. Great having you guys part of this series. And as Drew said, reach out if you have any questions. We're glad to help. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.